Hello, everyone. Welcome to our celebration. Before we get started, I want to tell you a few ground rules. First of all, your audio and video will be turned off during the webinar, during our celebration. So I invite you to go and munch on a hot dog or hamburger or have some ice cream and cake, get a glass of champagne or whatever you normally do to celebrate because we won't be able to see or hear you. We are going to be playing some videos during this, though, so I suggest that you turn your volume up as much as you can. And if you want, you can go to the bottom of your computer screen and turn on your closed captioning. We're going to start tonight with a clip from Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in his capacity as chair of the President's Religious Liberty Commission, when the commission was presenting the draft of its report to the President at the White House last month.
We're going to that. We found there was one constant theme. The overwhelming majority of our witnesses said that they were attacked and punished, and what was used against them was one phrase that's not in the Constitution, and that phrase is separation of church and state. The left has used that one phrase that was one line out of one of hundreds of letters by Thomas Jefferson to batter and hammer people of faith for the last 70 to 80 years. And this report will speak very clearly that we want to be sure Americans understand that they cannot be attacked by that phrase any longer.
Hello, I'm Nancy Friedman. I'm proud to be an American, which is why I have this flag and why I wore this shirt. And I feel privileged to live in this country. And I'm honored to be president of the Greater Houston chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Americans United is the only organization that focuses full-time on defending separation of church and state, which is the true guarantor of religious freedom for all. I hope that you all have your sound turned up in case anyone has joined us since I suggested that you do that, because the sound was very quiet on that clip. But at least there were closed captions, or captions, I should say. And what I hope you heard from that was Dan Patrick basically saying there is no such thing as separation of church and state, and they're not going to allow anybody else, any more Americans, to be, in his words, basically hammered over the head with it. Now, that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. At Americans United, we believe that true religious freedom gives everyone the right to live and believe as we choose, as long as we don't harm others. It's what prevents our government from favoring any religion over other religions or non-religion, from allowing anyone to discriminate or otherwise use their religious beliefs to hurt others. It's what allows us to come together as equals, to ensure freedom without favor and equality without exception. It's what allows the religious pluralism in our country and our state to flourish. And it stops the conflict and divides from the government playing religion and against each other, playing favorites when it comes to religion. Religious freedom cannot exist without church-state separation. As one of the biggest, most populous, and most diverse states in the country, though, Texas should be exalting this principle, not decrying it, not denying it. This is an American invention that we should all be proud of. So the three chapters of Texas, of Americans United in Texas, the Greater Houston chapter, the San Antonio chapter, and the El Paso chapter, known as Join Us for Justice, we have come together tonight to celebrate this foundational principle. We've come together to celebrate that our forebears 250 years ago declared independence from a country whose ruler embodied both the church and the state, the King of England. He was the leader of the country and the leader of the Church of England. By doing that, the founders, or the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, that was the first step towards creating this nation, they put us on the path towards a secular government. Now, we're going to celebrate tonight with some learning, some humor, some trivia challenges, some inspiration, some motivation. and maybe even a few fireworks from John Fugelsang. John Fugelsang is an actor, a writer, a political host, a podcaster, a television personality, and he's author of this book. Hope you can see it there. Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalists, Fascists, and Rock-Fleecing Frauds. I mentioned that we might have a few fireworks from John Fugelsang, because I'll just read you two sentences from the book jacket. One of them says that he has been murdered on CSI and picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church, and the son of a former Catholic nun and a Franciscan brother. He delivers a deeply irreverent and biblically correct takedown of far-right Christian hatred. He spoke at the Summit for Religious Freedom that Americans United for Separation of Church and State hosted in April. We're going to show a few clips from his talk. We're also going to show a few clips of Rachel Lazar and her welcoming remarks there. But before we get started, let's go back. Before we get to the clips, let's start at the beginning. Let's go back 250 years ago to the basis for this celebration, and that's the Declaration of Independence. I want to read to you a couple of sentences from the Declaration. There are two sentences in particular. One of them I think you'll recognize. The other one, maybe not. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a sentence you probably recognize, but it goes on. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, we know that back in 1776, basically white men were the only ones really included or considered to have those rights. And our country has been striving ever since to include the rest of us and to increase or expand the rights that the rest of us have, as they say, to produce a more perfect union. But tonight's celebration isn't about that first sentence. It's about the second. So let me read that one again. To secure these rights, these unalienable rights they talked about, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So it doesn't say that that governments are instituted among gods or churches or religions or houses of worship. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, and that is all of us. So right then, and the first thing that they did as a united group of colonies, these people that wrote and approved the Declaration of Independence set us on the path to a secular government. That was the beginning. We want to show a video now created by an intern from Americans United who elaborated a little bit more on the history of this principle.
As we celebrate the 250th anniversary of American independence, we need to take a look back at the history of one of America's best ideas, the separation of church and state. Before we have the U.S. Constitution, the Virginia General Assembly passed the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which protected citizens' right to practice the religion of their choosing. This bill was actually the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and it proclaimed that our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions. After the Constitution created the government we know, which included banning all religious tests for public office because, separation of church and state, we decided that we, the people, needed a Bill of Rights. While drumming up support for the Bill of Rights, George Washington himself sent a letter to the Toro Synagogue saying that the United States would give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, telling us that religious freedom is a right but not a license to harm others or to discriminate. 1 year later, the Bill of Rights was ratified, including the very first amendment, which specifically separates church and state partly because that separation is required to protect the free exercise of religion. That was unclear. In 1802, Thomas Jefferson used the phrase wall of separation between church and state to explain what the religion clauses of the First Amendment do. So as attacks on this foundational principle of our democracy increasing, it's time we remember that separation of church and state protects everyone's right to live as themselves and believe as they choose. White Christian nationalists are attempting to rewrite our history, so let's make one thing clear. America was not founded as a Christian nation. History tells us that the United States was founded on the principles of religious liberty and plurality. Check out the link in our bio for more information on how our work aligns with the principles of our founding.
Our intern mentioned white Christian nationalism, and I imagine most of you, if not all of you, have heard that, and you probably have a sense of what it is. But let's go listen to what John Fugelsang says it is in our first clip from him tonight.
Now, no matter what your belief system is, Christian nationalism guarantees that we are all going to have to work together. I don't think I need to do the obligatory paragraphs about the threat of Christian nationalism. I think we know the exposition. They're trying to eliminate the wall between church and state to realize their dream of turning America into a second-rate theocracy like Iran, but with Kid Rock music. And the Ten Commandments are being required in classrooms by Christians who are blindly obedient to a man who's broken all 10.
Now let's get to continue our history lesson. We're going to have a few trivia questions. Dave Triano, one of our board members, is going to give you the trivia questions.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Well, we will do 3 questions and each of 2 trivia exercises. The goal of these is to make sure that everyone knows the answers to these important questions. For each question, I will show it to you, read it to you, and give you 20 seconds to get the answer. You will not be able to enter it in the system. This is not a contest per se. Then I will give you the answer. So remember, this is not a test. It is simply a learning exercise. So here is our first question. Thomas Jefferson referenced a wall of separation in a letter to which group? The answer to that question is the Danbury Baptists. Second question. True or false? The Declaration of Independence refers to the Christian God 4 times. Okay. Yes, that is false. And our final question. This amendment guarantees the free exercise of religion and helps separate church and state. Okay. And this is the First Amendment. So it's the most important. It's the first. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Well, hope you all at least knew the First Amendment. The first one was a little more challenging, but the First Amendment is something that we all, the Americans United, talk about all the time. So hopefully everybody, if you didn't know that before, you'll know it now. As we've seen from these short history lessons, our founders believed that the best way to keep religious freedom in this country was to separate church and state. And they believed in religious freedom for all. But the problem is church-state separation is under attack across the country and, of course, here in Texas, as we saw with our lieutenant governor speaking. Again, he was speaking on behalf of the National Religious Freedom Commission, but what he said that day was no different than what we've heard him say many times before. He believes that separation of church and state is a myth. Hopefully, by listening to the lessons that you just heard from us, you'll know now that that's not true. And yet, Christian nationalists across the country want us to, or at least their followers to believe that this is a Christian nation and a Christian state, and they are doing everything they can to try to erode religious freedom for all of us. We've all heard how they've done this in Texas. They have got a campaign against Muslims, including even how and where they worship. They have limited reproductive choices of women because some of them have a religious belief because it's not scientific truth, believe that life begins at conception and therefore fetus abortion is murder. Of course, we've all seen about what has happened in our public schools, between mandating posting the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom to now mandating that public school students read passages from the Bible, to vouchers, which requires, even though the Constitution doesn't allow this, the Constitution of Texas doesn't allow us, but requires taxpayer money to go to support religious schools. That directly violates, that's a direct prohibition in Texas Constitution. And they've even demeaned values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they've punished and prohibited all efforts to try to help us get towards that more perfect union, to try to establish equality for everybody. Now, I will say this, that hopefully you knew everything that I just said. And if you didn't, you either haven't been getting or haven't been reading our chapters newsletter. So I encourage you to, if you aren't already on our chapters, email us, sign up for our monthly newsletter, because it does include information about what's going on in Texas. And we've covered all of the issues that I've talked about. Some say that Texas is the epicenter of Christian nationalism in this country. I said I was proud before to be an American. I was proud to be president of AU. Well, I'm not proud that characterization of Texas. Well, let's talk for a minute now, or let's listen to John Fugelsang now. He's going to talk to us about the dangers of Christian nationalism. Let's hear what he has to say in this next clip.
And it's nothing new. We have to remember something. The constant play of authoritarian Christianity for 1700 years, ever since Rome co-opted the startup, which is step one, they used Jesus, his name, his movement to gain power. Step two, once they have that power, they do the opposite of everything the character of Jesus says in the book. And step three, when someone points this out, scream that you're persecuted. That's been the play, and it's worked for 1700 years. A country founded by deists who didn't want a king, and a religion inspired by a rabbi who commanded us to love our enemies, have both been hijacked by these power-hungry frauds. And there's a lot of debate over what we should call these Christian nationalists. It's not a catchy term, I know. Fundamentalists, zealots, Christian supremacists, Christo-fascists, Talibangelicals. I mean, there's Chinos, Christians in name only. And, you know, some Chinos are white, some are brown, most are a shade of beige. They're irregular. All these groups, whatever you want to call them, they are a threat to the First Amendment and a threat to the New Testament, and all of them on their wedding nights watch The Handmaid's Tale as foreplay. Religious fundamentalism and Christian nationalism are not the same, but they're close enough to be illegally married cousins. So none of these groups fight for the teachings of Jesus, and that's important. None of them fight for the teachings of the star of that book they wave over their heads so bombastically. They don't fight for the Lord. They don't fight for the gospel. They're not fighting Satan. They don't care about religious liberty. They care about conservative Christian power and conservative Christian control over society. That is their only true religion. And we've seen it proven quite a bit, but I'll get to that. Now, sometimes when we criticize religion, and don't we all, they'll say, well, religion's responsible for all the war and violence and oppression of women and homophobia. And I understand why anybody would believe that. I mean, you look at the rap sheet for organized religion, and yeah, it looks like a real violent way to avoid paying taxes. But it's not the nice religious people doing that stuff. The overwhelming majority of liberal, moderate, and conservative Christians, Muslims, and Jews are getting along just fine right now around the world. They are forming families together. They are in school together. They are in businesses together. They are causing no drama. It's the far-right fundamentalists of all the world's religions that are ruining all the world's religions and giving all the world's religions a bad name. Fundamentalist Muslims, fundamentalist Jews, fundamentalist Christians, I assume the Scientologists, I don't know. Young people aren't leaving church because of Jesus or God or Santa Claus. They're leaving because of the cruelty and hypocrisy of so much of organized religion. And so it is today while a percentage of Americans identifying as religious keeps on going down, right? We're at a time when we have really the largest growing religious group in this country are people who were raised religious, but now call themselves spiritual because they're so put off to so much hostility. And as the amount of us, the percentage of us who identify as religious goes down, the percentage of Christians who believe we were founded to be a Christian nation is increasing. In other words, as the religious population shrinks, the fringe is growing. And sometimes the fringe is armed and crazy and thinks that Jesus really likes wrath. But please remember, going by the book, mixing extreme conservative religion with authoritarian power is literally what killed Jesus. And if there's one comforting constant in American history, it's this: it's always required alliances between different kinds of believers and believers with non-believers to push back the batshit crazy Christians. Always. That's our history. Because Jesus of the Bible, whether you believe him as a literal character or not, the guy that all of this is allegedly about, was a peaceful, radical, nonviolent revolutionary, hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks, never spoke English, was not an American citizen, was anti-capitalism, anti-wealth, completely anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer. Yes, he was. Matthew 6:5, anti-public prayer. Never once anti-gay. Never once mentioned abortion. Never once said that governments should force citizens to be pregnant against their will. Never once said that men should force teenage rape victims to stay pregnant against their will by their stepdad. This
By the way, two things I want to point out. One is that the chat is on. The Q&A function is off, but the chat function is on in case any of you want to make any comments, good or bad, about what you're hearing. And also, in case you wondered about the pauses or the space between some of Fugelsang's comments, I was there. I attended his remarks, his keynote address, and I could tell you the reason for the pauses is because of all the laughter. But to move to a slightly more serious part of this program, you've heard about the dangers of Christian nationalism sort of on a large level, as Mr. Fugelsang alluded to. And you've heard about some of the bad things that are happening in the public schools, like I just talked about. But it's important to remember that it's real people, real individuals who are affected by these things, whether it's somebody that is not allowed to have an abortion in Texas, even though her religion allows her to, whether it's somebody who's forced to look at the Ten Commandments on the wall, even though they were brought up in a different faith and it's against their parents' desire for that school child to be subjected to and forced to look at those commandments every day. Whether it's a Muslim child from a Muslim family who is hurt every day by their neighbors, who is accosted by their neighbors, maybe only on social media and maybe not personally, but by somebody who's talking about how Islam is a dangerous religion and Sharia law must be banned. And if that can't happen, then Muslims should go back to their own country. These are the kinds of things that can and do affect real people. So what we're going to do now is let you hear from one of those persons. This is a member of our own Houston community, and they're going to tell their story, their experience that they had growing up in our public school.
Hello, everyone. I'm Red Clemley. I use they, them pronouns, and I am an atheist. And I would like to share with you all a little bit about my story and why church-state separation is important, not only to democracy, but also for the people and children who live here, specifically in Texas. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and I was about 6 when we moved to Pearland, Texas, when it was fields of cows and an Albertsons. When you're the new kid on the block in Pearland in the late 90s, the question you're asked is, where do you go to church? When I responded that I don't go to church because I'm an atheist, my peers would respond by telling me that meant I worshiped the devil and it meant that I was going to hell. These weren't concepts that I believed in, but the fact that they did and thought that's where I belonged really hurt and affected how I felt about myself. I learned how to hide that part of me and only share that piece when I felt really safe. When I felt safe enough to share, I would. But atheist was the first identity that I learned how to closet. And I can't imagine how much harder that lesson would have been for me to learn if the kids at school could have pointed to the classroom wall and said, look, there are the 10 commandments. This means that we're right and you're wrong. I did have some friends growing up. I wasn't completely alone, but I did feel very isolated from the community at large. As I entered into high school, I had a few years of practice closeting both my atheist and my queer identities. But it was in high school that I started to find other queer students and got activated. My high school had a WebSense filtering system for the computers, so it would block access to certain websites for a variety of reasons. One of those filters was for gay and lesbian interest. So you couldn't go on to the aclu.org's website. You couldn't go on to pflag.org because they were blocked by this filter. However, you could get onto a website called godhatesfags.com, which was a hate site by Westboro Baptist Church about Matthew Shepard and how he was going to burn in hell forever. For those of you who don't know his story, Matthew was a 21-year-old living in Laramie, Wyoming in 1998. He was beaten and tortured and tied to a fence and left to die by 2 men because he was gay. I could access that website from my high school computer, but I couldn't access websites that offered resources for gay students from that same computer. And I thought that was messed up, and I thought there was no way this could be right. And so I used the computer at home to reach out to the ACLU for help. And I worked with them on a project and collected some screenshots and put some things together for them. And that's how my activist identity was born. It was also when I really started to realize just how important the separation of church and state is to a kid's sense of belonging. I never felt like I belonged when I lived in Pearland, and I ran away as soon as I could and came to Houston. And I started to find people who were really interested in the closeted parts of me, and they were curious about my values. When I started to find the queer community, I started to find myself. And for the first time, I started to find a true sense of belonging and what the benefits are of feeling like you are loved and accepted and welcome for exactly who you are, and you don't have to hide any aspects of yourself. I mean, wow, like that was life-changing, and it really continues to be life-changing. I think community keeps us safe and warm, and curious conversations challenge us to understand each other. And I think community and curious conversations are more important now than ever. And these are also the ways that we fight Christian nationalism, by staying curious and recognizing that different isn't danger, and that we can have different belief systems or no belief system at all, and still have shared values, and still want to find belonging, and still want to find a way to a democracy that holds space for everyone in it. And that's part of my story. And thanks for listening.
Fred, that was terrific. We appreciate not only you sharing your story and sharing it so eloquently, but we appreciate that you and your mother are supporters of Americans United. Red and their mother actually attended the Summit for Religious Freedom. In fact, not only this year, I believe you've attended 3 times the last 3 years. So again, we thank you. Thank you for your important contributions to this conversation and for your activism.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Red mentioned that staying curious is important, so we're going to have a few more trivia questions right now.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions. In 1980, the Supreme Court struck down a law requiring display of what in public schools? The answer is the 10 Commandments. And just think about where we are now. All right, question 2. Which former president wrote a letter to the Toro Synagogue in Rhode Island promising the government would give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, but generously affording to all liberty of conscience? Okay, and the answer is George Washington, as a number of people seem to know. And our final question, Article 11 of the 1797 treaty states that the U.S. government is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. What is that treaty? It is the Treaty of Tripoli. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you to everybody who participated. So far tonight, what have we done? Well, we've established that the separation of church and state isn't a myth, it's real. And it's not something that is new, that was created in a letter or by a court. It's something that the founders put in our oldest documents, starting with the Declaration of Independence, and then, of course, later was enshrined in the First Amendment of the federal Constitution. And by the way, it's also in the Texas Constitution, but tonight we're talking about the founding of our country. And we've also covered how important separation of church and state is. It benefits houses of worship and other religious institutions, individuals, governmental agencies, the whole community, and it protects all of them. If it's taken away from us, if Christian nationalists succeed in transforming this country from what it was intended to be into a Christian nation, not only will it hurt all of us, but they'll change our country into something different than what it is. It won't be the America that we all know and we all love. And many of us, if not all of us here in this celebration tonight, will find ourselves excluded or disfavored. So celebrating this foundational principle, this wonderful principle that we all should appreciate, is not enough. We need to act to maintain it. We're going to talk about in a few minutes how we can do that, but we're going to start by listening to Rachel Lazar, the president and CEO of Americans United, and some things she said about this at the Summit for Religious Freedom in April.
First, let's talk about the importance of having visible pride in the promise we are defending, that promise of church-state separation. Church-state separation, Joy, means that even as these attacks on church-state separation keep coming fast and furious, we must spend time celebrating our country's promise of church-state separation, really pausing on it. So I'm going to try to model this right now. How cool is it that church-state separation is an American original? That we're the first country ever to have it, right? How many people even realize that that's true? I feel joy every time I read Thomas Jefferson's reflections about the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, right, that he drafted, and it was enacted in 1786, right? That statute is seen as the precursor to the religious freedom protections in the First Amendment. When he wrote about his desire for that statute, he explained that religious freedom was, quote, meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination. Isn't that amazing? I mean, imagine how radical that was for back then. Right? And it's American History 101. Our founders got some things very wrong, but they got this very right. Church-state separation, Joy, is celebrating George Washington's letter to Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island that he wrote in 1790, right? Which famously says that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Those were some happy Jews receiving that letter. It's finding joy in the fact that in America, we all have freedom of belief. We are all free to live authentically as ourselves and to believe as we choose, so long as we don't harm others, right? That's who America is. It's in our DNA. It's who we're meant to be. And it's awesome. It's awesome. And yet, so many high-ranking officials across this country today are spewing disinformation about church-state separation. They're trying to rewrite our history, retell our country's story. Don't let them. That's where the visible part comes in. Don't let them. Talk, write, and teach about church-state separation. Preach about church-state separation. And not just with pain, even though some pain is understandable, also with joy about the promise itself. People deserve to know the truth about our country's founding ideals. And also, they'll fight harder to protect something that they understand is promised to them.
Now we're going to hear from John Fugelsang about how he thinks we should defend separation of church and state.
So my book is a guide for believers of all faiths and non-believers and agnostics on how to use the Bible when debating the right-wing Christian in your home or your school or your government or your social media feed, if you must. Because millions of us were raised to think it's a religion about peace and love and empathy, and we grow up to find it's been hijacked by this mean white supremacist tax-free clique. Jesus shows us how to call out the ultra-conservative religious frauds, and I just wanted to show people how rewarding it could be. And I love this organization because I actually think separation of church and state is the conservative point of view. Truly, right? I mean, and as Rachel said this morning so beautifully, yeah, the founders were slave owners who committed ethnic cleansing and thought women shouldn't be included in this democracy, but they got a couple things right. I think we shouldn't just teach separation of church and state as a single idea. I actually believe it should be taught as 5 interlocking ideas. Because lesson 1, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, drafted by Jefferson, championed by Madison, rejecting the idea that the state could privilege one faith over another. It's a good thing the Heritage Foundation hasn't read that. Then the Constitution's buddy movie, the Establishment Clause, Congress can't make a law establishing religion. Its badminton partner, the Free Exercise Clause, says individuals are free to do with their religion what they want without government meddling. Then the First Amendment should be number 4 of what we teach. The Bill of Rights, the one everyone knows, but I think we need to teach that differently to show how freedom of religion and freedom from religion by design sits right next to speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. Freedom of religion is designed to be part of the American freedom cinematic universe. And finally, the thing I really wish we would teach, the ultimate mic drop, the Treaty of Tripoli. Like when we use separation of church and state to solve a problem with pirates, like started by George Washington, ratified by the Senate, signed by John Adams. The treaty states plainly, the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. These guys wrote it down more than once. And like Jesus, they left very firm instructions for when they were away. Separation of church and state isn't just a single rule. It's a framework that connects everything. It is baked into our system, like caffeine is baked into coffee beans, and thank God for that. So I think the time has come to stop calling these leaders nationalists, to stop calling them fundamentalists, and to just start calling them fake Christians. That's not very polite, I know, right? It's horrible. It's mean. Who the hell am I? Who am I to call someone a fake? I'm in Coyote Ugly. Who am I to ever call someone a fake Christian? So please know when I say fake Christian, I'm not referring to ordinary folks who have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, and led astray. I'm not talking about your racist cousin who thinks vaccines turn you gay. But we have to start focusing on the politicians and religious leaders who manipulate them and always have throughout history. Name it. Call it out. If we don't call out the fake Christians, then we are allowing them to frame all religion as authoritarianism, that all Christianity is authoritarianism. If we don't label the fake Christians, then we're letting them put MLK in the same basket as the KKK. Same religion on paper, right? Completely different moral universe and practice. If Christianity is defined by the teachings and example of Jesus, then these two things cannot be morally equal expressions of the same thing.
I hope you're enjoying John Fugelsang's remarks as much as I am, even though I've heard them before. Now I'm going to suggest a few other things that you can do. They're maybe a little less controversial than what he said. First is stay informed. Sign up if you haven't already for the national organization's monthly email that has clips about what the organization is doing, links to articles about our cause or where Rachel Lazar was quoted. And if you're a member, of course, you get Church and State magazine. I don't know if y'all can see that because I can't see it on my screen. But if you're a member, you know that this is a monthly magazine that is chock full of information in a very readable manner. If you have a particular issue that is of importance to you, go to AU's website and you'll probably find some information about it, resources that'll help you either learn about it or address it or deal with it. Follow the national organization and our chapters on social media. If you'd like, whether you're in the Houston area or elsewhere, sign up for our Houston chapter's email list. As I said, we do a monthly newsletter that focuses on things that are of importance to not just the Houston area, but all Texans, and also has information about events. Speak up. That's the second thing, because you have to know what's going on, but the next step is to speak up. Use your influence. Tell others what you know and what you've learned. And tell them why separation of church and state is important to you. We heard Red tell their story so effectively and so eloquently. A lot of us have our own stories. So think about your story, whether it's something as personal as what Red told us about, or the fact that you don't like the Ten Commandments posted in public schools, or you don't believe that our Texas legislators should have done that when the Supreme Court said less than 50 years ago that that's unconstitutional. Whatever it is, whatever's important and meaningful to you, tell others, because not everybody knows what's going on in the country or the state and knows that church and state separation of church and state is under attack. Many people probably take it for granted and don't realize what's going on. Other ways you can do this, though, is inviting us to speak. Our Houston chapter has created presentations on reproductive freedom as religious freedom, and we're working on one on Christian nationalism. We have been speaking about that, but we're putting together a PowerPoint presentation. We can give that presentation in person, in Houston, in the Dallas area, or in Austin, or we can give it virtually all over the state. We have done that with our reproductive freedom as religious freedom presentation. We'd be more than happy to present it to any organization that you can get us an invitation to. If you know a supportive faith leader, suggest that they connect with the national organization. The national organization has a network for faith leaders, and they invite those faith leaders to do things like sign petitions, sign letters on issues like this. Also, please connect them with us. Our Houston chapter has our own network of faith leaders. Again, we send them information about how they, as faith leaders, can support our cause in particular. Act. The national organization has an action network that sends emails only 3, 4, 5 times a year, specific actions that you can take. It could be something like contacting your school board about requesting, for example, that they not vote to have chaplains in schools. And that does work. Last year, when all of the school districts, or 2 years ago, when all the school districts were required by a new law passed by our legislature to vote on whether or not to allow chaplains in their schools, Humble, Katy, and Cy-Fair ISDs are some of the area districts that voted not to have chaplains in schools. And that's after they heard from many of their constituents who told them they didn't want chaplains in schools. So especially at the grassroots level, contacting local officials can help. And this is just one of the kinds of actions that you can take. I read a poll recently, a Pew poll, that very few people, I think it's less than 20% of people, maybe less than 15% of people in this country, contact their legislator. So think how much influence you can have if you take the time to do that. Vote. Now, we're a nonpartisan organization. I can't tell you, and I won't tell you who to vote for or against, but I will tell you, vote for religious freedom. You can go and find out which candidates support it and which don't. This is so important that I encourage you to vote and tell your friends and neighbors again about why this is such an important issue, what's happening, how it's under attack here in Texas and across the country, and encourage them to vote for candidates who support separation of church and state, and true religious freedom. And finally, and perhaps most importantly to us, if you aren't already a member of Americans United, join. Membership for annual membership is only $35 a month. And I can say it's one of the only things that hasn't gone up in cost in the last couple of years. $35, unfortunately, hardly buys people a night out at dinner anymore. And if you are two people going to the movie, might not even get you your movie ticket. So $35 to support separation of church and state is a very good deal. If you're a kind of person who prefers to give monthly membership starts at only $5. Most of us wouldn't miss $5 being taken out of our bank account. So either way, we would encourage you to join if you haven't already joined, and please continue to maintain your membership because collectively, all of our voices together are stronger and louder and more effective and more powerful if we're all part of this wonderful organization. Now, I have mentioned a few times, if you live in our Houston area, or even if you don't, we're happy to have you on our email list. If you are a member of the El Paso or San Antonio communities, you should look them up too. The El Paso website is joinusforjustice.org. That's joinusforjustice.org. San Antonio's is AmericansUnitedSA.org. That's AmericansUnitedSA.org. Now, if you don't remember these, don't worry. I found them by Googling them, and you can too. And our Houston chapter's website is AU Houston. We have a very long name, but a very short website, auhouston.org. So we invite you to go to any of our websites, take a look around, join. If you haven't yet joined and you decide to join, please join through our chapter websites. It benefits us, and it also benefits you because not only will you become a member of the national organization if you join from one of our websites, but that way we can start contacting you immediately. And already we'll know that you are one of our supporters and one of our community members, and you want to know what's going on. At the end of our celebration tonight, there will be a slide that has all of our contact information on there. We are coming to the end of the program. I want to thank board members Dave Triano, who you've heard from, and Keith Thompson, who's sort of the man behind the curtain tonight. He's the one that sort of kept us all running. They both put in a lot of time, and that's because this is important to all of us. And I assume it's important to you too, or you wouldn't be having the celebration with us. I want to thank the San Antonio and El Paso chapters for helping us promote this program. I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you had some laughs, learned a little bit, got inspired, and resolved to fight for this important foundational principle that affects so many issues that we all care about. Before we go, though, I want to leave you with one last piece of hope from John Fugelsang. Thank you again for coming.
We are getting kinder all the time, even if our economics don't reflect that, and even if the Christian nationalist movement doesn't reflect that. We can't hate them back, but we've got to fight them, and not for the founders and not for Jesus either, but for each other. Thank you.